And once again, we're reminded of SAM's favorite trope, the girl who can't read. As the lead responds, "Where do I go? I can't read, and I have no map."
Totally fair and valid concerns. Honestly, what is it with SJM and FMCs that can't read? And also, why is it so funny that she was like,
It's sad, but it's also kind of funny. I can't read.
And Manon's like, "You'll be fine. Stay off the roads." And then just leaves.
Everyone. Welcome back to the Book Talk Fantasy Podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Guys, we are finally finishing Queen of Shadows. How bittersweet. Man, I love this book, and it's taken off so much that it's pretty hard to stop and take a break and switch to Onyx Storm. I really want to jump into Empire Storms, but I just love both worlds, and life is hard, so...
What a first world problem to have, right? I have two amazing
truly.
worlds in books, and I want to cover them both.
But truly, I do say this after every single TOG book, it really does just get better and better as we progress.
You really do say that after every book.
At the end of every book, I'm like, wow, that was so great. And then the next book, I'm like, wow, that was so great.
Yeah, no, this book I think by far is the best in the series. The general consensus I've seen, just being a person on the internet, is that for a lot of people, this is their favorite book in the series, and I can definitely see why.
Ooh. As a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 79 through 89 specifically, but there will definitely be spoilers for all the books we've covered so far. This includes Tab, TOG, Calm, and Hoth. Otherwise, this series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. So typically we include our overall book review and thoughts at the end of our final episode, so normally that would happen within this episode. But to make sure that this doesn't end up being like outrageously long, we are actually going to release the final book wrap-up as a separate episode, so be on the lookout for that. Next, Onyx Storm has arrived, and by the time this episode comes out, we will probably already have released our first Onyx Storm episode. Those episodes will continue with our spoiler-free nature, so we hope that you all will join us as we jump back into the Empyrean world. That's all for housekeeping, and let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter, and finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
With Hope. Chapter 79. The bridge exploded beneath her and Aelin fell into open air, hurtling toward the solid ground below. It was only the cocoon of her magic burning through the glass and Rowan's wind slowing their fall that spared her and Dorian from being shredded by that glass. Aelin landed softly in the grass, and then the world went dark. When she awoke, she took in the ruins of the glass castle. Only the stone castle remained. She made her way out of the castle grounds and addressed the terrified citizens of Rifthold. She laid down the law and told them until King Dorian was ready, she was in charge of the city, and if any of them stepped one toe out of line, she would burn them all to ash. Gee, that's not intimidating or anything. Aelin made her way back to the stone castle. She was barely inside the oak doors before she collapsed to her knees and wept. Chapter 80. Elide had been in the dungeon so long that she'd lost track of time. No one was coming, well, except for Vernon. He paid her a visit and introduced her to her betrothed, who was none other than Hinsel Cormac, who also happened to be wearing a wordstone collar around his neck. Vernon told her that he and the Duke had big plans to see what the magic in her blood could produce. An exhausted Manon was ready to sleep for days, but she quickly realized Elide was missing. Manon didn't waste any time scouring the halls of Morath for Elide. Finally, a fellow laundress stopped Manon and told her that Elide had been taken to the dungeons. Manon launched into a sprint, not to the dungeons, but to the witches' barracks. To the 13. Chapter 81. The guards came to get Elide, and though she tried to fight it, it was useless. Elide sobbed, and the guards laughed at her nakedness, her powerlessness, until a hand with glittering iron nails shoved through the throat of one of them. They weren't laughing anymore. Manon and the 13 scoured each of the 3 dungeons, leaving a trail of dead men and black blood in their wake. They were relentless and lethal, and they did not stop until they found Elide. Manon told Elide they needed to run, but when they stepped into the hall, they saw Kaltain standing there, her dress flowing around her like liquid night. Chapter 82. Kaltain quickly traded clothes with Elide and smeared blood all over herself, and by the time she was done, they could have been twins. Kaltain took Manon's knife and cut a sliver of stone from the angry scar on her arm and gave it to Elide, wrapped in a scrap of cloak Selainus Ardothian had given her in a cold, dark dungeon so long ago. She told Elide to find her and give her, only her, the key. Manon and Elide began to run, and Kaltain became Death, a devourer of worlds. When the guards came to get her, she let them, and before they could cut into her, she burned them all to ash with her shadow fire. But she did not stop there. She went to where those witches were being tortured and burned everything. Burned the men and their demon princes, the cradles and the monsters within, and the witches who looked at her with gratitude in their eyes. She brought it all crashing and crumbling around them. Kaltain smiled and at last burned herself into ash on a phantom wind. Manon and Elide barely made it to the area in time before they heard a boom. They heard it again and then felt the rush of warm, burning air push past them. When Manon looked back to where they had just stood, there was nothing left. Chapter 83. In the aftermath of the destruction, our beloved Fab Five spent the next 3 days recovering. Aelin and Dorian slept while Rowan and Aelin ran the castle and the city. Lorcan paid a brief visit, but was quickly shut down by Lysandra, vomiting Vogue blood and guts all over him. Gross. Hilarious, but gross. When Aelin finally awoke, she and Rowan had a romantic heart-to-heart after he took her for a potty break first, of course. But much to our disappointment, they stopped at a kiss because Rowan didn't want to bed an invalid. Anyways, Aelin was finally healed enough, and so for the first time in months, she went to talk to Dorian. Chapter 84. The theme of this chapter is heart to heart to heart. First, Aelin talks with Dorian and reassures him that everything would be okay and that she would always be there for him. Next, Dorian goes to talk to Chaol, where he tells him that he is paralyzed from the waist down, but he is going to send him to the Terrasen, where the best healers in the world are, and he better hurry up and get better because Dorian had made him his official hand of the king. After a tearful moment of brotherhood, they are then interrupted by Nezrin, who bursts into tears of relief after seeing Chaol, and it is decided that they will go to the Terrasen together. Chapter 85. Elide and the 13 landed somewhere in the oak-walled forest. They stopped for the night, and when Elide awoke, she went to the stream to bathe and process everything that happened. She then was faced with Manon, and she told Elide to go north to Terrasen and to find her queen. Even though she was unsure and afraid, she found the strength and the courage to face her fears instead of running. The 13 departed, Abraxos' joyous cry echoing. Limping, Elide began the long journey home. Chapter 86. We aren't done with the heart-to-heart talks yet, folks. Aelin offers Lysandra a small parcel of land in Terrasen along with the title of Lady. Naturally, Lysandra accepts, and the two share a warm, fuzzy moment that gets us all in our feels. Later on, the court is having dinner, but they are interrupted by Dorian. Aelin insists he joins them, and it struck Aelin 10 years later, and they were all sitting together at a table again. No longer children, but rulers of their own territories. Then years later, and here they were, friends, and despite the forces that had shattered and destroyed them. And so they toasted to a new world, to freedom. Chapter 87. The Duke survived, and so did Vernon. Manon sat through the council meeting as the Duke ranted about the losses Morath sustained. As Manon prepared to leave the chamber, she gripped firm Vernon's shoulder with her iron nails and threatened. Just because Elide was dead didn't mean she would forget what he tried to do to her. Later on, Astrid and Manon talked, and Manon asked Astrid what it was like to love. With silver-lined eyes, Astrid told Manon of the pain and joy that love brings. Astrid grinned at Manon, and Manon grinned back. Chapter 88. Aedion was ready to go home, so he took it upon himself to wake Lysandra and Aelin up at dawn to get ready by throwing a bucket of water on them. Unfortunately for Aedion, he forgot that Lysandra could shift into a ghost leopard, so his punishment was swift. But Aedion is right, there wasn't reason for them to linger, so they packed their supplies and said a tearful and emotional goodbye to Chaol and Dorian. That night, Dorian didn't know what awoke him. He opened his balcony doors, needing to feel the river breeze on his face, to know that this was real and that he was free. He looked out at the glass wall as it sparkled and froze. There was a giant beast and a figure atop it with white hair that shimmered like moonlight. Even from the distance, he knew it was her. It was Manon. Manon Blackbeak sailed into the starry night sky, thinking of changing winds and a changing world. Manon didn't know what to make of it all, but she hoped they'd all survive long enough to make sense of it. She hoped. Chapter 89. For 3 weeks, Aelin's court rode straight north, 3 weeks of grueling travel, but also 3 of the happiest weeks Aelin had ever experienced. When at last Aedion finally said, "It's just up this hill," Aelin demanded to know what Aedion meant, but he and Rowan just grinned at her. They crested the hill and halted. Aedion touched her shoulder and said, "Welcome home, Aelin." Terrasen was beautiful, better than her memories and her dreams. Aedion pointed to a small, weather-worn granite boulder carved with whorls and swirls, and told her once they passed that rock, they would be on Terrasen's soil. Aelin ran a hand over the sun-warmed rock, then she stepped beyond the stone. At long last, Aelin Ashriver Galathinius was home.
Yay!
I want to cry right now. I really do. Okay.
I know.
And that concludes the book report for Queen of Shadows.
Thank you.
That was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
It was very emotional. I'm glad we ended on a good note in this book. Because I have a feeling the rest of the books are just going to be emotionally damaging in a negative way.
Yeah, this is the last shred of happiness we'll feel for a long time.
True that. Okay, so thank you for the book report. And now let's get into the analysis, starting with some overarching thoughts.
Okay, wow. The end of this book was just chef's kiss. I thought the resolution of everything was really well done. Because it's an 8-book series, obviously there are going to be questions we want answered and problems that need to be solved. And sometimes books in a series can end in a way that isn't satisfactory, even despite knowing there's more coming. But I love the way this ended. All the pieces came together. All the players in the unfinished game have been revealed. And I'm really excited to see what happens in Empire of Storms, as I'm sure we all are. My second thought is very similar to what I said in Heir of Fire. The writing in this book was just absolutely stunningly beautiful, and specifically this set of chapters. I think I teared up in every exchange the characters had. I've talked about this before in the podcast. There's this way that authors can end a chapter or a scene, and it's like with this really meaningful note of finality that just really moves you. There were just so many of these moments in the set of chapters for me that I would okay, wipe the tears away, and then the next one would start, and I'd be like, fuck.
I know.
It just was so moving, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Something I've noticed with all of the books in this series so far, each individual book kind of closes and wraps up kind of nice, but it still gives you information to continue on. But I don't feel like there's ever been huge cliffhangers of the book ends right in the middle of some kind of intense scene or something like that. So
I don't feel frustrated by where it ended. Of course, obviously the whole series is completed for us, but I think about how I would feel if I was waiting for the next book to come out. And I feel like for this ended in a good place. Of course, I would want to read the next book, but I'm I can wait. This is a satisfactory, kind of tied neatly up in a bow ending. Whereas I feel maybe perhaps in the Empyrean series, I did not feel that way after Iron Flame. I felt very frustrated. So this is just another comparative series. I like when the book kind of wraps things up, but also leaves the door open for more.
Totally agree. All right. So with that being said, let's get into our actual chapter analyses, starting with chapter 79. In the aftermath of Dorian destroying the castle, Aelin throws out a huge shield of fire that protects the entire city from a storm of glass. That's pretty crazy. It is wild that she was doing this as she was just free falling toward the ground and had basically decided that she would protect Rifthold and then die. But I really like the quote that said, "For the royal theater and the flower girls at the market, for the slaves and the courtesans and the Philique family, for the city that had offered her joy and pain, death and rebirth, for the city that had given her music, Aelin kept that wall of fire burning bright." I like that despite so many awful things happening to her in Rifthold, she still chooses to ensure it stays safe because she knows, the whole city and regular people are innocent and everything.
Yeah, and I like that she chooses to focus on the positive, the good things that her time in Rifthold brought her, right? It brought her Sam, it brought her music, it brought her dancing. I also really like that she is also keeping her promise to Chaol, especially because for quite literally the entire book, this was a big point of contention for both Aelin and Chaol. Chaol was worried that Aelin would take out her hatred of the king on the citizens of Rifthold as punishment, which, I can't really blame her. But also, as you said, all those people are innocent and didn't really do anything, right? They're also victims of the king's rule. So I like that she resolved that and kept her promise to Chaol. We also know that Rowan's wind magic is ultimately what slows her fall and prevents her from dying on impact. And I thought it was interesting when it said, the wind tore at her and it sounded like it was roaring her name. This just screams to me that Rowan, through whatever magical and emotional bond they have, is using his magic not only to save her, but to let her know that he's there. And I feel like in a way he's like telling her, I'm alive, I'm okay, stay alive, Aelin, stay alive. Because he has to know that Aelin's close to death. I feel like in every book, Aelin is like on the verge of death. She's right on the cusp, and then she always comes back. And so I thought it was nice that she could hear through Rowan's wind magic, him calling for her.
Yeah, it's their bond.
Yeah. Oh, God.
It's noted that as soon as she lands in the grass, a darkness slammed into the back of her head. At the time, I genuinely didn't know what this was, but definitely remember this for later because it comes back up in relation to Lorcan. We see that Dorian and Chaol are alive and breathing as well. Aelin realizes that Rowan had buffered their fall, explaining why Aelin and Dorian weren't dead. I also found it interesting that Aelin thinks beside him as if some benevolent god had indeed been looking after them, lay Chaol. Shortly after this, it's revealed that Aelin had actually slipped the real Eye of Elena into Chaol's pocket as she fled the throne room. In chapter 72, it said the king's dark power obliterated him until there was nothing but light, burning blue light, warm and welcoming. At the time, I just thought it was Mala's influence. To be honest, I do still think she had a role, but in this case, it was the eye that saved him, aka Addison, you were right about that.
I usually am. But in all seriousness, this is probably one of those things I just need to ignore for the sake of the plot. But it makes total sense to me that Rowan was able to save Dorian and Aelin because they were right next to each other when the glass castle fell. But Chaol was in the king's council room, presumably quite far away from where Aelin and Dorian were. In that description, Aelin's running up and up and up and over. And so how in the hell did he end up right next to them? I know there's a line that's like, by some miracle, as if some benevolent god had been looking out for them. But still, it kind of feels like bullshit to me. But ultimately, I love Chaol, so I don't care. But I was like, okay, really?
That's funny. Well, I guess if Aelin can shield an entire city, I'm sure Rowan's, as a byproduct of his wind helping Aelin and Dorian, it just saved him from the fall as well.
I feel like he should have been shredded to bits by the glass, honestly.
Probably, but
ignore it for the sake of the plot.
Aelin rises and walks into the city toward the new world that beckoned. And I also found it interesting that she punches the glass wall with a battering ram of blue flame. The only other time I remember her having blue flame specifically was back in Calm when she steps through the portal to save Chaol and Fleetfoot. I do think that it's interesting that her fire is blue right now, which matches the blue light from the Eye of Elena. And I wonder if blue is distinct to Elena or if it actually traces back to Mala, since Aelin is related to both of them. So whoever it is that it comes from, she'd likely have it in either case. But I was just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually discussed this briefly in Heir of Fire a little bit during the Beltane festival. It's mentioned that she can make her flames all different colors, red, orange, green, blue, etc. And we wondered if the color affected the magical properties of the fire. But I do like your connection of blue fire to Elena's blue light.
She heads to the butchering block in town to announce to all the people that your king is dead, your prince lives. My name is Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, and I am the queen of Terrasen. Your prince is in mourning. Until he is ready, the city is mine. She really came in there and laid down the law with all these traumatized townspeople. And I think it was just a little bit overkill to be like, I'm gonna burn all you bitches down if you revolt. But I just thought it was kind of funny because I don't think anybody's doing anything right now. I think everybody's quite literally in shock. So,
oh my gosh, I know. She's treating them all like they're vile, despicable criminals. I guess she got her point across, but I did think that was a little intense. There's another thing she says later that I put in my notes that I'm just like, okay, girl, you need to reel it back in a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
Especially when she's like, I'll melt this glass wall and molten glass will flood your city, your homes, and your throats. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's really a good way to endear the people of Ireland to your cause. It's not threatening or unnecessary in any way, shape, or form.
She also goes on to free all the slaves, declaring an end to the king's empire. I really love this because this has been a primary goal for her since the very first story in Tab. And because of her promise to Nehemia to free her people and the slaves of Calcula and Endovir. She's finally fulfilled that promise now after everything that's happened, and I think Nehemia and Sam would be proud of her.
I think they would too. And I'm really happy that Asham didn't let that subplot die. It really has been
Mhm.
an important part of Aelin's goals to free all the slaves in Aurelia, and I think this is a really good start. I didn't think about how she had now finally fulfilled her blood oath to Nehemia because it was two-part,
Yeah.
right? It was to see her father's crown restored and to free the slaves. And so now that all the kingdoms are free from Adolin's rule, I do wonder if we'll see an alliance between Aelin and Nehemia's family in Eelway, or if there'll be any kind of,
Ooh.
connection there.
All right, so that ends chapter 79. Moving on to chapter 80. We switch to Elide, who is still trapped in the freezing dungeon thanks to Vermin Vernon. Despite her feeling that ripple in the world, she had no idea what was going on, and I was really curious about her magic and how much implied magic she likely has. We've had conversations about this before, but I guess our working theory on why nothing is manifesting for her yet is because technically she's still a witchling age-wise, and because she hasn't had her period yet. And that's information that we get based off what Manon tells us earlier.
Yeah, I agree. To me, if her magic had manifested, she would have known instantly when magic was freed. Like in
Right.
all the POVs from the characters, they all know instantly. Aelin can feel her magic. Rowan, Lysandra, Manon very
Mhm.
distinctly can feel the magic coursing through her veins. Even Elide didn't even know magic was freed until Vernon confirmed it for her. So I think if she had access to a well of magic inside of her, she would have felt that release. So I do think she does have magic. I just don't think it's awakened, matured, activated, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Or the plot twist in all of this is that Elite actually has no magic. And everyone just thought she was super
Oh,
magical this whole
that's
time. But
totally
actually,
possible.
she
That
doesn't
would be
have
kind of
anything.
funny. She's just a normal girl.
Vernon comes in to announce he'd be sending someone to clean her up the following day since magic has returned, and then he brings in a collared, valg-infected man named Cormac. And if you're
Ugh.
wondering why that name is familiar, it's because Cormac was one of Arabin Hummel's most loyal clients and investors, whom Aelin had disguised herself as during Adian's rescue. It was also noted that he went missing, and I thought we'd never meet this man, but here he is in the flesh now, infected with a Valg Prince. Honestly, I feel like it was kind of a bit random, but I guess it does make sense that as someone who wronged the king because of all the lies Aelin spun about him and everything, and given that apparently he has magic since they put him in a collar, kind of makes sense that that's how he ended up being captured and used by the Valg.
I also thought it was a bit random, especially because this is revealed and you're like, ooh, this is going to be significant. He's now come up twice and then he dies 2 chapters later. And you're just
Yeah.
like, oh, what was the purpose of that reintroduction? So I agree, it was a
Yeah.
bit odd.
They totally could have kept that as just like a random Valg Prince. There was really no need to have it be Cormac.
Yeah, I agree. I know we've discussed Elise's character before, especially in the context of how she's a Blackbeak witch by heritage, but by nature, she is oftentimes timid and comes off as weak. But then I feel like there are all these little moments like this when Vernon enters the cell, Elide thinks maybe if she got lucky, she'd find a way to get that chain around his throat. And that is very Blackbeak witch coded. And so it's just so funny because one moment she's sobbing and vomiting, and the next she's like, I'll wrap my chain around your throat. Like, wait, what?
Okay, Lee, do it then.
Do it
She
then.
says it in her head, but she doesn't actually do anything. And I'm like, girl,
Yes. Every time
fight
I
for
read
yourself
that,
a little
thank
more.
you. Every time I read that shit, I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? Then do something. And instead, she's like, I can't read. How will I get to Terrasen?
Oh, gosh.
I do like
literacy
Elide. I don't mean to make fun
issues.
of her, but it's just kind of
Yeah,
silly to
yeah.
me.
Same. So aside from this, Vernon is just gross because he intends to betroth Elide to Cormac and experiment on her for breeding, which we know they are doing to try and produce foul kinks. I also still want to know just how the fuck Vernon got involved in all of this in the first place. Where did he come from? How did he figure all this out? When did he enter into this alliance with all of them?
Yes. And what is his ultimate motivation? What is he getting out of all of this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So, crazy thought slash kind of question for you. Vernon says to Elide, don't be so dramatic. A little incision, a few stitches, and you'll be perfect. Do you think they were going to sew the other word key into her just like Kaltain, or just like a bit of word stone like they did with the Volg witches?
I don't know. That's really hard because it ties into this question of how many word keys did the king and the duke have?
In
Did
their
they actually
possession.
have in their possession? Yeah, exactly. It's a little ambiguous still. So at the time when I was first reading this, I didn't think it was fully going to be another key. This is going to be something that I think we continue discussing later on in this episode. But yeah, at the time, I genuinely was like, I think it's just a word stone, but who
See,
knows?
that's kind of where I was leaning, but it really seems to me like they're treating her more like Kaltain than they are the witches.
Yeah.
There's just this vibe about the way Vernon describes the magic in her blood, and even, the Duke wants to see what comes of it. It feels more like a Countane thing than a breeding of the witches thing. But ultimately, I guess we won't really know because Elide is no longer there, and Vernon thinks she's dead.
So thank God we were right about Manon waiting to find Elide because it was about to get really bad for her. Manon returns to her room only to quickly realize Elide hadn't even been in the room for several days based off of her worn scent. She bolts through the castle to the kitchens, realizing that Vernon would have capitalized on her absence and worried that perhaps Magic's return had awakened something in Elide. I am all for carrying Manon. She's a little softy now. She fucked up that laundress for saying perhaps that cripple had gotten what was coming to her. And I was so proud of Manon. I was like, yes.
Okay, but honestly, that laundress lady was brave as fuck to mouth off to Manon. I mean, she's shitty, so I'm not sad
Stupid.
that
She was
Manon taught her a
stupid.
little lesson. I know, but most of the time the servants are too scared to even look Manon in the face. And that laundress was like, she didn't give a shit. I mean, she shouldn't have said that because it was pretty ugly. But I'm like, that's a
Was
brave
she
ass
brave or was
person.
she just stupid?
Oh, probably stupid. You're right. Never mind. That was really stupid of her.
Eventually, another woman informs her that she was taken to one of the 3 sets of dungeons, but they didn't know exactly which one. Before Manon heads to gather her 13, she thinks she didn't let herself think about the laundress's gratitude or what it meant for those weak, helpless humans to have even considered trying to rescue Elide on their own. She did not think that woman's blood would be watery or taste of fear. So ultimately, it's the heart that matters, Manon. And I just love seeing Manon's transformation and how she thinks about other beings outside of the witches. I think she's growing this appreciation for the humanity of ordinary humans.
Oh, yeah. Especially because there's that quote where she's like, it was not a weakness to defend those that could not, even if they were nothing to her, or something like
Right,
that. And I
right.
feel like this kind of similar sentiment here.
Yes, totally agree. Moving on to chapter 81. Most of the descriptions of the servants roughly bathing Elide and then the guards coming in to leer at her and letting her robe fall open were awful and horrendous. And that would be terrifying and absolutely traumatizing to be powerless to do anything. As all of this is happening, this was again one of those moments where I really wish that she had some magic or something so that she could at least defend herself a little bit. But as all of this is happening, Manon suddenly punches an iron-clawed hand straight through the guards' throats and sets her eyes for glowing like living embers before she shreds them. And I was like, yes. Because they're finally able to access their magic again, it seems one of the witches' powers is extreme speed. They were already fast without their magic, but it seems way more quick now based off the descriptions that were happening in this scene. I really love when Manon tells the guards, "You're already dead men." And then when she kills them all, Elide thinks, the witch who had come for her.
Manon didn't just kill those men, she fucking obliterated them. Like, when they're
That's
talking
true.
about how she pulled out that guy's spine, I was like, wow. Ugh. Honestly, it kind of made me gag a little bit, but I do not have a stomach for that, okay? I know we all know this because it's repeated 50 million times, but the witches are truly ruthless, vicious, lethal killing machines. I like it, but also I'm terrified of them. Honestly.
Yes. Don't get on the bad side of 13. Ever.
Ever.
After this, we go back in time to get Manon's perspective while she rushes to actually find Elide. When she returns, Morath was in a total frenzy with the news of the king's death, courtesy of Aelin Galathinius, the fire-breathing bitch queen witch killer, FBBQWK for short. If you're ever in doubt about what's going on, just think, what would the fire-breathing bitch queen witch killer do?
That really rolls right off the tongue. I like that.
It really does, yeah. Manon does bring up a couple questions, including what would they do now that the mortal king was dead, and where would they go, and were they actually free of their bargain?
And for once, we both agree with Manon when she thought later. Manon would think of those things later. Now she had to act. But we're definitely going to need her to circle back to those questions ASAP after saving Elide.
At first, I was like, yes, just leave. But then, of course, you remember that Erewhon is alive and the witches don't know that he's been right there the whole time. Then I had a side thought. Do you think this is what Granny knows and that's why she's been so suspicious? Maybe this has been Granny's goal. She's not really necessarily afraid of Erewhon. She wants to align with him because he is the most powerful evil entity on the continent and probably in this world. And this is what she was really after by agreeing to allow the witches to be bred. Or, alternatively, maybe Granny turns out to actually be good in the end and she created the witch mirror knowing Erewhon was alive, and they're actually going to backstab him by using it to somehow put him back in his tomb or like through the word gate or something. I don't know. I'm doing a lot of speculating here, but...
Oh, absolutely not. Granny B, she is evil through and through, okay? She knows the Duke is really Erewhon, and she's trying to get in good with him. For sure. For sure.
Okay,
There's not a shred of redemption in that woman. I'm sorry. She's irredeemable. I truly believe
asked
that.
it because of the king situation. You know, like
True.
In the end, we get this huge reveal about what was really going on with the king after all this time being like, he's a baddie bad, you know. And so I'm not going to take it off the possibility that we're going to have some double agent twist happening with Granny. But for the most part, I definitely am on board with the fact that Granny B is just a baddie bad.
I guess the only way I could see that play out is if like Erewhon wanted to do something to Manon and Granny was like, no, not my granddaughter, you know? But even then, I don't think she would. She's so just diabolical. I just don't see it.
Diabolical. She really is. That's so true. While Manon races to the third dungeon, she recalls a strange, soft female voice whisper, "Hurry, Blackbeak, you race against doom." And then shortly after, the voice continues to urge Manon to go faster, and Manon thinks it was a goddess peering over her shoulder, a lady of wise things who perhaps had watched over Elide her entire life, muted without magic, but now that it was free. So when Manon first hears the voice, for a moment, I thought this was the three-faced goddess, but we quickly see that it's actually Aneth. So Aneth is the goddess that Elide prays to, who is the lady of wise things. It's touching to know that despite what Elide thinks, Aneth did seem to have heard her prayers and has watched over her. But without magic, Elide, I guess, really hasn't been able to feel like her pull over the years, and therefore, I think she probably just felt that she'd been forgotten by her, you know?
Absolutely perfect analysis. I thought the exact same thing. No notes. Chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss.
I loved it.
Manon finds Elide, and it was the sound of Elide's weeping, that girl of quiet steel and quicksilver wit who had not wept for herself or her sorry life, that gets Manon fired up. All of these thoughts that we get from Manon about Elide and how Granny had sold the witches to these Valg men really does make me think she's going to find a way to sabotage them in the end, especially once she realizes who Duke Parrington is. We're now back in the present moment of time as Manon helps Elide out of the cell. And their options are pretty limited because more Valg are streaming in. Somehow they always just seem to know. I think they just have like this sixth sense for like...
Oh my God, right?
Destruction. Because it's like that high-pitched whistle that calls dogs. You know, humans can't hear it, but like it works with dogs. That's what's happening with the Valg. As soon as they feel like a little tremor of things in the world, they just come streaming in.
Well, they do sense pain and fear. They feed on that.
True.
So maybe it's like sharks with blood in the water. You know, they can smell it from a mile away.
Interestingly, Manon finally realizes that it had been regret that she'd felt that night she'd killed the Kraken. Regret and guilt and shame for acting on blind obedience, for being a coward when the Kraken had held her head high and spoken truth.
I love this moment of clarity for Manon and for being brave enough to acknowledge it. I am so excited that Manon is starting to step into her own, and I cannot wait to see how her story progresses. Especially now that her and Astrid are back on the same side and the 13 has been, I guess, like realigned, right? They're all on the same page. And so I'm just really excited to see where they go.
Manon is like in her social emotional learning era.
Truly, all the things she should have
She's
learned
learning
as
so
a
many-
witchling. Yes.
So many new emotions that she's discovering that she has the capability for. So
It really is like a toddler. Compassion, kindness, love.
she recalls all the other times that she'd felt regret, including Astrid's story and how she'd feel if Elide were to die. And I was really proud of Manon for realizing that it did not seem like a weakness to fight for those who could not defend themselves, even if they weren't true witches, even if they meant nothing to her. I think Manon has subconsciously known this because she struggled with conflicting feelings, basically ever since she met the Wyverns and when she chose Abraxas, but she's fully become consciously aware of it now. The emphasis on brutality, discipline, and obedience was obviously intentionally enforced by Granny so that they never questioned what they were doing and would be ruthless in the pursuit of Blackbeak goals. But I like that Manon is realizing there is no strength in blind obedience or brutality. We've seen her realize that mercy is a strength and that using her innate strength for a greater good is much more important than using her strength for pure destruction. Prepared to fight their way out, the chapter closes with Lady Kaltain's surprise arrival outside of Elide's cell.
I gotta be honest, on a first read, seeing Kaltain did not make me feel relieved. It actually made me nervous because I feel like she's unpredictable and there's still some ambiguity on how much control she has over her choices and her power. Like when Manon confronts her that one time and she burns her a little bit with her shadow fire. So it's like you really don't know if she's good or bad. And it's not because of her own moral choices. Her identity has been stripped away. So you really don't know what remains of her humanity. So when I saw Kaltain, I was like, which way is it going to go? Obviously, worked out. Well, I don't say it worked out good for Kaltain, but she helped Elide and Manon. So it's good for them.
Right. That's a good point. I like the term unpredictable for her. That's a good way to put it. Moving on to chapter 82. Kaltain warns them the other Valg would be coming since Elide hadn't been brought to them yet. And then Manon confronts Kaltain and asks, how long has it been since you destroyed the demon in that collar, and whether the Duke knew? Apparently, the Duke doesn't know, and Kaltain only responds by Dark Liege sees what he wants to see before quickly devising a plan to trade places with Elide. One thing she keeps saying is they see what they want to see in this scene, and I wonder if this is alluding to a similarity in magic between Kaltain and Elide. We also know that they do look pretty similar because they also recall how Vernon had said, you could be sisters.
Yeah, that stuck out to me too, but for a little bit of a different reason. And that reason is, I don't know actually, but I'm just going to note it here because I feel like that phrase, because it's repeated twice, it has farther reaching implications than just what's happening right now in real time. I'm wondering if this sentiment is going to come up again. Like Manon will have a realization and she'll be like, oh, they see what they want to see. That's what Kaltain had meant or something. So I'm just going to note that here.
Yeah, bookmark it for later.
That's right.
I have so much respect for Lady Kaltain, and it's awful that this has been her role and path in this book. She's been treated like absolute shit from the very beginning, and now her final path to freedom is literally to die. That's how she's gonna be free in the end.
So crazy to think about her character's journey. We literally started with her being an obnoxious court lady who was obsessed with Dorian. Like, remember Aelin pushed a flower pot off her balcony to try to hit Kaltain? And now the end of her story, she's a badass shadow fire wielding queen. In some rights, she's just as badass as Aelin. It's crazy to think about her story arc.
We also can't ignore how Kaltain slices into her arm and then pulls out a glimmering sliver of dark stone. And then Elide feels a dull, strange thudding pounded through her as she grasped the shard. And then Kaltain says, find Selena Sardothian, give her this. Tell her that you can open any door if you have the key. Tell her to remember her promise to me to punish them all. When she asks why, tell her I said they would not let me bring the cloak she gave me, but I kept a piece of it. To remember that promise she made. So first off, I definitely teared up at this. We're taking it all the way back to the beginning of Calm when Selena visits Kaltain in the dungeon cells of the castle with that phrase.
Yeah, so I remembered this scene, but I could not remember the exact phrasing. So I actually went back to Calm and reread this part. Selena makes this promise to Kaltain after she was temporarily put in the dungeons after attacking Chaol in the aftermath of Nehemia's death. Kaltain tells Selena, if they let you out, make sure that they're punished someday. Every last one of them. Selena, aka Aelin, says they will be. Selena swore to the darkness. I just love that so far she's held up her end of the promise, right? She is punishing all those motherfuckers. And so I hope that continues.
Second, we get confirmation shortly, but at this point, I was like, this has to be the key. The feeling it gives Elide is similar to the description Aelin gives from the key that she has. And then when they say it can open any door, like, I was just mind blown that they actually did stash a key in Kaltain. But also, once again, I'm like, what the fuck was her lineage? And why did they put it in Kaltain? I don't know. It's just bizarre to me that they're like, you know what? I have this really powerful thing. I'm going to put it in a person and that's where I'm going to hide it. I don't understand.
Know. Especially because, remember back, I think it's at the end of TOG, we get that POV between the king and Parrington. And they're like, oh, you know, it worked a little too well on Kaltain. Like, it's indicated that they specifically sought her out. And at the time, we're thinking it's because whatever purpose to get to Dorian or whatever, it's not really revealed. But now with hindsight, did they specifically select her after all this time because of her lineage? Was this always the ultimate goal for Kaltain, to make her a vessel for a word key? And it kind of feels like, yes, it really does.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I feel a little unresolved about this because Kaltain's dead. And I don't know if it's ever going to get explained why she specifically, like, why not put a key in Roland? What about Kaltain is necessitated that? So I hope that gets answered in some way. Also, I just have to say, you're totally fucking right. Honestly, I thought you were crazy when you were like, I think there's a key inside of her. And I was like, nah, girl, I don't think so. I didn't think that he would do it. But it does, I guess, make sense because there were a lot of descriptions about the scar on her arm. You know, we were on Scar Alert like day one.
Right.
And so I guess it does track, but you were right about that for sure.
It didn't click, honestly, until we got Kaltain's POV about how she described what was in her. Then I was like, oh shit, that language feels way too similar to how the word key is described. But if we hadn't gotten that, I would have just assumed it was some other word stone like the rings or the collars or whatever they're putting in the other witches, you know. I mean, they were that crazy. They were crazy enough to do that shit.
I know.
To get back on track, fully disguised as bloody, dirty Elide, Kaltain assures them she had no interest in living any longer after everything she'd experienced, and she suggests they basically just get the fuck out of the keep. She's like, I'm not waiting for you, just leave. We changed to Kaltain's perspective, and gosh, I was speechless. King Prawn, jaw on the floor.
Speechless. Oh my God.
I keep thinking about the Death's Devourer of Worlds thing, and I do truly feel like she's become something similar to a Valg at this point in terms of her power. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, but I'm just really curious about what she became after being infused with the word key. There's just so much that I want to know because I feel like it'd be very helpful to figuring out what's happening in the future.
Yes.
The guards don't even think twice of Kaltain's disguise, but while they haul her to the catacombs, she thinks she was a void, empty without that sliver of power that built and ate and tore apart worlds inside of her. His precious gift, his key, he had called her a living gate. Soon he had said he would add the other and then find the third. So I was like, OMG, why? This is the said confirmation about the key being in Kaltain, but this seems to confirm that the king and Erewhon have possession of two keys. And so at some point now they need to figure out the third key, which Aelin obviously has. I don't know. Ultimately, the huge question is, as we talked about, why put it in Kaltain? Why didn't Erewhon put it in himself or like lock it up somewhere so that it couldn't be taken? What's special about Kaltain? Is it because she had already been gifted with fire magic? Was the key the only thing that could warp her innate fire into this shadow fire? Or does it quite literally like need some kind of person to access its power? How do these keys actually work? There's just so many questions that we don't get answers to about the word keys right now, but my mind was spinning.
Oh, totally. And I'm going to lay down a few more questions that I feel ultimately we just cannot answer because we don't have enough information. But why didn't he already put the second word key in her if he had it? Why wait? And also, what the fuck did he mean by a living gate, right? We know the
Right.
word keys open the word gate. And so I totally agree. There's just so many questions about this. I feel like Sarah J. Maas can't leave these questions unresolved, but I don't know how she's going to work them in since Kaltain's dead. I don't know, but we need answers.
We demand them.
Oh, we demand them.
Several Valg are down below, including Cormac, but before they can cut into Kaltain, she unleashes her shadow fire upon them all. It's important to note Kaltain had a deeper well of this fire in her, so we'd never really seen the full range of its strength until now. I also find it interesting because it says the fire she had harbored since magic had returned, the golden flame now turned to black. We have speculated a distant lineage tracing back to Mala somehow, since Kaltain, has been gifted with fire magic, but we never get full confirmation. Either way, this was a very badass scene.
I am just absolutely convinced she's a descendant of Mala in some way. I just don't see how she could not be. Like the way the world
Right.
is described and how magic is described and how Aelin's power is so rare and all that. She just has to be. Man, I just want to know what the fuck is up with Kaltain.
I know.
But now she's gone.
It's like such a tease. Her character has just been a tease this whole time.
Yes. Oh my God, literally though.
Kaltain ends up incinerating one room after another as she makes her way around the catacombs, and most importantly, she heads to the breeding room with the yellow legs and burns them all. And there's a quote that says, "She burned the cradles, she burned the monsters within, she burned the men and their demon princes, and then she burned the witches who looked at her with gratitude in their eyes." I did find it interesting that the iron door to that room, specifically, it says it did not bend to her magic. We've known that something about iron in general works to quell magic somehow. There were the iron doors in the catacombs of the stone castle that Aelin finds. Dorian uses iron to suppress his magic, and now we have this door. And I still wonder if something related to iron is going to come up again later on, but it's notable that it doesn't bend to Kaltain's shadow fire either.
I feel that is especially significant considering not only does she
Right.
have powerful fire magic, but she literally has had a word key in her body. And yet somehow even that cannot bend the iron. And it makes me think about how it's described that Erewhon's tomb was iron and stone. And so I think even iron itself could probably at least mitigate some of Erewhon's power.
So her promise now fulfilled, Lady Kaltain takes out a huge part of Morath's castle in addition to herself. Rest in peace, Lady Kaltain.
Lady Kaltain. We said don't sleep on Lady Kaltain, and we were right.
Ugh,
She's
and now she
gone.
has forever been put to sleep, so.
I loved it when it said, Kaltain flowed into the room, spreading her arms wide, and became Shadowfire, became freedom and triumph, became a promise hissed in a dungeon beneath a glass castle. Punish them all. As we discussed earlier, this is the exact promise Aelin made to Kaltain back when they were in the dungeons together in Crown of Midnight. Ultimately, I am glad we didn't sleep on Lady Kaltain, but I am so sad because they did her so wrong. They did her so dirty in this series from the very, very fucking beginning. But despite all that, I am happy that she's free from her chains of oppression, even if she had to literally burn herself to ash. Ultimately, at the end, she had control of her fate, right? She wasn't killed. She went out with a bang, quite literally, in her own way, But it still sucks.
She deserved better.
She did. Justice for Lady Kaltain.
Always, forever. Justice for Lady Kaltain. We switch back to Manon and Elide, who sprint for their lives to the Wyverns and the 13 because Kaltain had no intention of waiting for them to get out. And just in time, the 13 launch into the skies as Morath explodes behind them. Manon looks back to see that a third of the castle was now smoldering and in ruins. Also, the tortured Yellowlegs were now put to rest.
I thought the glass castle shattering was epic, but honestly, this was just as badass, if not more so. Like, the way I picture this in my mind, I'm like, damn. They're literally talking about stone fucking melting. I'm like, ugh. I don't know. I just see it like
Very
really
intense.
good in my mind. Yeah.
So many explosions in these final
Yes.
sets of chapters.
Really?
All right, moving on to chapter 83. Most of the rest of the final chapters revolve around the recovery and aftermath of the Glass Castle's destruction. Aelin and Dorian spend the next 3 days sleeping to recover with Rowan on watch, while Aedion assumes control of the castle for the time being. We learn almost all of the castle guards have been killed, but the surviving ones have since been imprisoned. There's also a brief mention of Philippa, and TBH, I forgot about her, but she is still kicking in the castle and is now in charge of looking after Dorian.
I totally forgot about her too, honestly. When I saw, I'm like, oh yeah, Philippa! So I'm glad to know
Philippa!
she made it.
After that, we rewind a couple days to the immediate aftermath after the glass castle falls, where after setting an unconscious Aelin in bed to rest, Lorcan comes by for a word with Rowan. And a lot of this conversation is from Rowan's perspective as well.
So did you think that he only wanted to talk to Rowan or he wanted to talk to Aelin as well? Because it seemed to me like he was trying to get into the room with Aelin, but both Lysandra and Rowan blocked him. So he was just kind of like, fine, I'll just settle for talking to you, Rowan.
I would think he probably has questions for Aelin. I'm sure Lorcan has probably figured out by now that Aelin is very clever and knows a lot more than she typically lets on. I'm sure he had questions about the amulet or the key, and
Oh, the key,
he was
what
probably going to
happened?
take whatever information he could get, because Lorcan seems like he's trying to get the upper hand, but obviously he was stopped, so I don't
Yeah.
know, but that's a good question. I thought it was hilarious that at first he's blocked by Lysandra, who stops him, and then she vomits all over him immediately. And it's because she's back in her human form and ate all of these Valg. And also, can you imagine the smell?
Ugh.
The Valg already smell pretty bad, but now covered in digestive enzymes and just...
Okay.
I don't want
Okay.
it.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Literally, my note is this is hilarious, but I didn't dwell on it too hard because I started to gag. And one thing you guys need to know about me is I'm a sympathy vomiter. Okay. So I'm going to need you to change the
Oh.
subject. I still gag when I think about Aelin in the sewers too hard. So I really fucking can't. But you know what?
Ew.
Lorcan deserved that. He needed to be humbled.
Oh, he totally did. For lying about those word hounds and setting them up, absolutely. This is like the
Absolutely.
least of the payback that he should be getting for that. So, having shielded Aelin's room with a wall of wind, Rowan meets Lorcan in the antechamber and confronts him about the word hounds. I guess it was only a matter of time, but we learned that Lorcan had figured out that Gavriel was Aedian's father, and his commitment to Gavriel was the only reason that he'd come back to save them. He's like, I don't care about you guys, but Gavriel's son. And apparently he hadn't known that Aedion was Gavriel's son until that very morning when they'd left the apartment. Rowan also thinks only for honor for the blood bond between them, not for saving this continent. The same twisted bond was leading him now to destroy the keys before Maeve could acquire them. Lorcan meant to do it too, even if Maeve killed him for it later.
We talked about this quite a bit in the last episode, but once again, I am just so confused by Lorcan and his motivations and his morality. A little part of me believes that it wasn't just because he felt guilty about damning Gavriel's son. I think part of it is that he cares for Rowan, especially when you tap into this idea about how Lorcan feels very strongly about brotherhood, like Gavriel's my brother, I couldn't do that to him. And it was not that long ago that Rowan was his quote-unquote brother. I mean, they've spent over 100 years together, and I just feel like Lorcan is a little bit like Manon in the sense that he pretends, the people that you love are only a weakness, but in reality, he can't help it. He's a softie.
We'll see. I still think Lorcan probably has respect for Rowan, but now that Rowan's made his choice in terms of his support for Maeve, leaving the cadre and, transitioning to fall under the leadership of a different queen, he's kind of like, you're on your own. Because he wasn't going to save them if he hadn't learned about who Aedion really was.
That's what he said, but is that the truth? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this a million times about Lorcan. I don't know.
Lorcan's morally gray, simply put. We don't really know his true motivations about anything at any time. They tend to shift a lot depending on what outcome he desires. And so
I would argue that Lorcan is actually truly morally gray. A lot of times we use morally gray to talk about people like Rowan. But in reality, his morally gray nature is he's violent against people who are bad, like enemies, right? but you're not really morally gray. You're just a violently lethal goody-good. But Lorcan really does seem, in the truest sense of the word, morally gray. His morals shift in terms of what serves his purpose. And so I think Lorcan is a true morally gray character in that regard.
Lorcan leaves with the words, "It's not over," and we transition back to present time. Rowan is understandably stressed as fuck, especially because Aelin had healed herself too quickly when magic was freed, and she'd ended up sealing glass shards into her skin. And I was like, gag, I cannot imagine what that would feel like. That sounds incredibly painful.
Yeah, it gives me like the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. It was very horrible to contemplate.
Fortunately, the glass was removed by a healer, and then Rowan finished healing Aelin's skin again, though her tattoo was now once again ruined. I like that Rowan thinks about Dorian and had thanked him for being willing to lay down his life for him, though he hadn't said much else about everything. It sounds like Dorian is probably in shock, but Rowan also thinks not all wounds could be healed with magic, but they did heal eventually. This is super cliche, but it definitely aligns with the idea that, time heals all wounds in the sense that you never forget traumatic things that happen to you or that you experience, but in time you learn to process and accept them and get to a place where they don't continue to affect you on a day-to-day basis, I guess.
Yeah, I think all of our characters have a lot of processing to do.
So much, yeah.
I thought it was so cute that Rowan offered Dorian a dagger as thanks. And Dorian was like, "Oh, no, don't mention it. I could never accept." But then he takes it and he never takes it off his side. He's just fucking fangirling so hard. Like fucking Rowan, Whitethorn, the greatest Fae warrior, gave him a dagger and thanked him. He's like, he's just fucking sobbing.
Rowan also thinks about Dorian's tremendous power, which would have to be trained. And then he thinks Aelin had taken a tremendous risk in weaving her power with his. The prince had raw magic that could be shaped into anything. Aelin could have burnt herself out in a second. Rowan definitely recognizes the power in Dorian, but I'm assuming it's not enough to be able to explain what it actually means. I am just dying for more information on the nature of the type of magic that Dorian has. But this also confirms that Aelin was the one feeding her magic into Dorian. And it wasn't like this equal blend necessarily. That was a little bit unclear in that scene.
Oh yeah, I've read that like 8 times. I still don't know what the fuck was happening, honestly. Rowan also mentions Dorian is definitely going to need to train and learn how to control his magic or it could destroy him. But, they all go to Terrasen and they leave Dorian to fend for himself. So who the fuck is going to teach him about his magic?
True.
Like, Dorian's alone because Chaol and Nestor are going to go to the Torre Chesme. So...
You know what? Maybe this is how Nehemia or like the spirit of Nehemia comes back into play.
Oh,
because remember,
I would like
in Crown of Midnight, she was the one that was like, when it's time, I'll be here for you and all of that. And of course she dies, but I could see her coming back into play like as a spirit.
You think
or like
so?
as a guiding source potentially for Dorian. Yeah, because she's the only other one who knows enough. And at the time, we were speculating about maybe Dorian's magic as being pure raw magic also possibly was connected to word marks or like how word marks kind of operate. Because we know that's another source of magic that wasn't affected by whatever the king did. They kind of operate independently of other types of magic. And so I don't know. But I totally agree, aside from that somebody needs to help Dorian. He can't figure this out on his own.
Yeah. How would he? Especially because the king fucking destroyed all the books and resources on magic. So, like, what the fuck is he going to do?
That's for Empire Storms to figure out for us, I guess. So next, Aelin wakes up, and after a brief argument about Rowan being pissy, they converse about everything that had happened in the last 3 days while Aelin had slept.
I was cracking up so hard when Rowan said, "Distracting Dorian with running the castle is the only way I've kept him from chewing on the furniture." And they really just treat Dorian like a big, dumb, silly golden retriever,
I know.
I mean, that was funny, but I was like, guys, okay, really? But I just want to say I was also extremely proud of Aelin, not just for opening up to Rowan, but needing to. For so long, she has kept all her thoughts and feelings and worries inside and has eaten her alive. And I am just so proud that she has matured and come to a place where she has someone she can trust to process with. And it's become part of her not personality, but it's become part of her process, right? And
Yes.
that's a really big step in her emotional maturity and growth.
Once finished, he helps her go to the bathroom, and then they cuddle in bed to have a heart-to-heart. Rowan gives a very heartwarming speech that I'm going to read because I thought it was very cute. He says, "You make me want to live too. I spent centuries wandering the world from empires to kingdoms to wastelands, never settling, never stopping. Not for one moment. I was always looking toward the horizon, always wondering what waited across the next ocean, over the next mountain. But I think that whole time, all those centuries, I was just looking for you." And oh my God. Okay, by this point, I was like, we know that you guys are mates now. We just don't know how. Like,
It's the how for
killing
me,
me.
but yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, if they're not mates, you know what? I don't even know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna be real dramatic about it.
So then they kiss. Yay! If they do the deed, we wouldn't know because their scene ends. And I was
Oh, they
like,
don't do it.
not coolest GM.
You
I know
know,
they don't, but I was
okay,
kind of, yeah.
disappointed yet again.
Yeah. Even if they did, we wouldn't know because the door just closes and their scene ends.
He's like,
It's like, yeah. After that, we changed to Adian's perspective for the first time in basically like forever. But he sees Rowan and Aelin making out, and I thought it was sweet that he thinks the Fey warrior's arms locked around her as he looked at her the way that she deserved to be looked at. Unfortunately, just like us, Adian was also shut out with a gust of wind that slams the door in his face.
honestly, that was hilarious to me. I loved like playing that out in my mind. And also, I
Yeah.
didn't think about it till you said it, but you're totally right. We have not gotten 80 in POV in a fucking while. Like, basically since the beginning of the book.
Yeah. He's been
Absent.
like really sidelined.
Yes, this is one of my complaints. When we do our end of the book wrap up episode, I will talk at length about this.
Yeah, we just never get any of his POVs. He's just a perpetual third wheel for most of Queen of Shadows. So
Yup.
Adian turns around to find Lysandra outside, who says, "This is what I'm going to find one day," with tears in her eyes, before she also walks away. And then at this point, I was like, ooh, do we think there might be a little something happening between Adian and Lysandra in the future?
Oh my god, abso-fucking-lutely. Especially because Adian jokingly responds, "A gorgeous Fey warrior." And then it says she gave him a knowing look before walking away. Bruh, come on. And then, of course, they mean flirt the entire way to Terrasen. If they don't at least have a little, romantic tryst, I'll just be beside myself. I mean, I'm not saying they're endgame. I don't know about that. But they're going to at least explore the opportunity. Totally.
I hope so. Perspective change to Aelin the next day, who heads to visit Dorian. Lorcan apparently took back Athar's ring, though he never verified that the amulet of Orinth wasn't a fake. I'm assuming he doesn't know, because he would definitely be pissed about that. But I'm not surprised that Lorcan took back the ring, because he is definitely the type to want the upper hand at all times. Same shit he was trying to do with the word hounds, right? He was gonna get the key, have his ring and all that, and then kill them off so that they wouldn't be a problem for him anymore.
Well, and realistically, he needs the ring. If he's going to go to Morath and find out where the other word key is, or if he knows anything about Erewhon, or, I mean, really,
yeah, that's true.
In his pursuit of any word key he's going to encounter Valg, he kind of needs it. They all fucking need it, honestly.
They gotta figure out how to make more of those ASAP.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Just before Aelin reaches Dorian's door, she recalls her spicy time with Rowan. And once again, there are barely any details because Aelin is an invalid, according to Rowan. And that is how the chapter ends.
How romantic.
So cute. Very nice, Rowan. Moving on to chapter 84. This next chapter starts off with Dorian, and it is abundantly clear that he is permanently traumatized from being infected with the Valg. He's thinking about the peaceful silence in his head, whether he's still alive, and the permanent reminder of what had happened to him in the form of a pale band of skin around his neck. Dorian is also feeling very guilty, and he thinks he was still in that bedroom, working up the nerve to survey what he'd done, the castle he'd destroyed, the people he'd killed. He'd seen the wall, proof of his enemy's power and mercy, not his enemy, Aelin. Man, that thought just really contextualizes how close Dorian was to being completely consumed by the Valg. The fact that he's still kind of confused about who Aelin is and is like switching back and forth and trying to sort out what were the Valg's thoughts, versus what are his thoughts while he was collared. He really just needs some therapy immediately. Get him some better help.
Better help. He needs something, man.
Aelin comes in and they have a conversation about the aftermath as well. Dorian is basically concerned over his worthiness to be king after what he'd done and an immense amount of guilt over Sorce's death, trying to kill Aelin, and Chaol's injury. I really liked Aelin's advice to him when she says, "You will learn to face it and to endure it. When you're ready, I'll be here. We are the masters of our own fates. We decide how to go forward." I like this especially because Aelin and Dorian have been set up to be the change from the very beginning back in TOG. Aelin believed in Dorian because he represented how things could be better, while Aelin herself has been prodded into being this fated character who's going to rattle the stars and defeat the ultimate evil. Aelin and Dorian have now set the path ahead to be under a new order and structure, and most importantly, they can do it from a position of allyship now. The scene ends with Dorian asking, "What do I do?" and Aelin responding, "You light up the darkness." And I was like, "Aww."
Oh, I like this scene a lot, and I found it very touching. But I feel like it's very obvious Dorian is just not ready to take over and start ruling, and it kind of sucks that they all just abandoned him for Terrasen. I know they have to go, but something about Dorian finally being back and then they all immediately have to separate again is just really upsetting. It really begs the question for me, what is Empire of Storms going to hold for Dorian? What is he going to do for the whole book? Because he's alone. But he's got to rule Otterland. He can't just up and go to Terrasen with Aelin and them. He has to stay there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Aelin has her whole little cadre with her and her court, and they follow her everywhere now. And Dorian has to start completely over. He doesn't even have anybody to rule with anymore. He literally has no support. It's really bad.
I mean, normally you'd have Chaol, but Chaol has to go to the Tory Chesme, so he's just alone.
I guess it's going to be Manon.
Ooh.
Well, something going on with that. Okay. So, yeah. Anyways, next we check in with Chaol. He awakens to find Dorian sitting in a chair beside his bed, and he is brought to tears, realizing that Aelin had done it, and the demon in Dorian was now gone. They also have a very cute brotherly moment, which I appreciate because they are brothers, basically.
Oh, absolutely. I've said this before, but I really love that this series has so many deep and caring relationships between characters that aren't all romantic. This is actually one of my favorite scenes from this set of chapters, and probably from the whole book, if I'm being totally honest.
It's revealed that poor Chaol is now paralyzed from the waist down. Rowan had healed 2 of the higher-up injuries on his spine, but the lower fracture had been too complex for him to try and heal. So this was interesting because as far as I was aware, I thought Rowan only had ice and wind power, plus just the innate ability to heal himself because he is Fae. But apparently he can heal others as well, since he fixed Chaol's injuries.
Yeah, I was a little unclear on that. Dorian also says that Amethy might have been able to heal the injuries, but she died when the glass castle shattered. And for those of you who forgot, even though I fucking didn't, Amethy was the other healer who ratted them all out. She told the king about Sorcha, Dorian, and basically was the catalyst for all the events that transpired at the end of Heir of Fire. So, not saying she deserved it, but I'm not saying she didn't. I'm just going to say karma, okay?
I think she deserved it. Absolutely. She ratted them all out and got them in there. She deserved it. Yes. Dorian decides the best option would be to send Chaol to the Tory Chesme in the southern continent, where he could get help from the best healers and hopefully walk again.
Ooh, okay. I'm trying to fortify myself for a second so I don't cry.
Aww.
When I say the tears were flowing during the scene, I mean they were flowing. It was when Chaol said, "I'm not leaving you, not again." And then Dorian says, "You never left me, Chaol."
Aww.
And then Dorian starts crying and he says, "You never left me." And I was fucking done for, guys. Oh, I can't remember if I was in Target or in my car, but I'm like, he never left me.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Their brotherly bond.
I want to cry right now thinking about it.
They are interrupted by Nesryn, who comes to check in on her man. Congratulations are in order because Nesryn has now been appointed as the first female captain of the guard. And Dorian also announces that Chaol will be his king's hand. Yay! Dorian heads out, leaving Nesryn and Chaol to some privacy. And I thought it was funny that Chaol tries to make a joke about technically breaking his promise because he can't walk. And then it makes Nesryn burst into tears. And I was like, oh.
Chaol and I are kindred spirits in this. I am a big fan of diffusing and or coping with tough situations through humor. Sometimes not at the right time. So I feel for Chaol. Totally.
I really like Nesryn and Chaol together, though, and I found it very sweet that she promises they would heal him and figure out their roles together. Obviously, their entire exchange was very cute, but I liked when Chaol says, "You might not even want a crippled man," and Nesryn responds, "Don't insult me by assuming I'm that shallow or fickle." I think they actually balance each other out really well. We know Nesryn hasn't been afraid to challenge Chaol's thoughts and opinions earlier on in the book, but we see there's been a significant progression in their relationship, and it's solidly romantic now. And that ends chapter 84, moving on to chapter 85. Back with the witches, Elide is very emotional over Kaltain's self-sacrifice as they fly. They stop for the night, and Elide considers how she would find Selena Sardathian to repay the debt that she owed Kaltain. Manon joins her at the stream and takes a more hardball interpretation of Kaltain, stating she did it for herself, to free herself, and she was entitled to. After what they did, she was entitled to rip the entire damn world to shreds. And at first I was like, ooh, that's a little... It was like kind of a tough opinion, but then I was like, okay, that's actually so real. Kaltain may have given them a warning, but she wasn't going to wait for them to get out. So I still think that there maybe was just a tiny bit of human left in Kaltain, because she wouldn't have switched clothes with Elide if there wasn't. But at the end of the day, she was ready to just get her revenge and then move on to the afterlife, I guess. So.
She wanted to punish them all. What she said to Aelin back then, and that's what she felt now. Honestly, I know we keep saying this about Kaltain, but I am just still in shock about the whole Kaltain situation. Never in a million years when we first met her back in TOG would I have guessed how her story ended. So cheers to SJM, because that shit, I'm still like king prawning it over here.
Manon announces they'd be leaving Elide in the forest alone. And once again, we were reminded of SJM's favorite trope, the girl who can't read. As Elide responds, "Where do I go? I can't read, and I have no map."
Totally fair and valid concerns.
I just find it hilarious that the witches, they save Elide, but then they just like throw her out in the forest alone again, and they're like, peace, figure it out, bye.
Honestly, what is it with SJM and FMCs that can't read? And also, why is it so funny that she was like,
it's sad, but it's also kind of funny. I can't read.
And Manon's like, you'll be fine, stay off the roads, and then just leaves.
Oh my god. Definition of tough love. So,
seriously.
In reality, Manon advises her to head north and stick to the forest until you hit Terrasen, and also gives Elide the DL about what happened in Rifthold.
I love that Elide's resolve is so strong. I love when she thinks, find Selena Sardathian. She would do that to honor Kaltain and the gift she'd been given, to honor the girls like them, locked in towers with no one to speak for them, no one who remembered them. This is a very common theme for Elide in Queen of Shadows. No one was coming for her, no one remembered her, no one thought of her. And I like that despite that, instead of being bitter and using that as a way to treat other people that way, instead she's like, I will be the champion of those people. I also got a little emotional when Manon tells Elide she should probably not mention her mother's heritage to Aelin, and Elide says, having black beak blood does not seem like such a horrible thing. And Manon responds, no, it does not. And I was like, oh, it's a little like heartfelt, touching moment. The Blackbeaks are good. They're good.
They are. In the most amount of affection that I think we may have ever seen from Manon, she lays a hand on her shoulder and says, hope, and then arms her with daggers and finally frees Elide of those damn ankle shackles. With a bow, Elide and Manon separate, but I definitely don't think this will be the last time they see each other, and I think this, dare I say, friendship they have with each other will come in handy later. As she heads into the forest, Elide swears she feels a warm hand brush her brow as if an answer. Limping, Elide began the long journey home. Obviously, we have our God Watch situation, and Elide is referencing Aneth, but I'm going to be crushed if these gods are never explained. There's been so many of them watching over a variety of characters and representing different magical beings, and I really want the origin story and to figure out how they came to be. Were they ever real entities, or have they always just been figures that the beings of the world believe in? I just need more answers about the gods and their nature.
I agree. There's a lot of mystery surrounding them.
And that ends chapter 85. Moving on to chapter 86. Aelin begins packing up her belongings, and Lysandra is a real one for hauling all of Aelin's clothes, books, and fancy items from her apartment to the castle. But most importantly, Aelin reveals another surprise and gives Lysandra a piece of territory in the north for her to rule over as a lady. I think my favorite friendship is between Aelin and Lysandra now. They've come so far and experienced so many similarities, but I love that they are now BFFs for life. A big goal for Aelin has been to free slaves, and Lysandra quite literally has been a slave up until recently when Aelin paid off her debts. But she's taking it farther now by elevating Lysandra so she can take back ownership of her life individually now, or at least like that's how I'm thinking of it. I especially love that the ring has a key symbol and a ghost leopard on it to remind Lysandra that she holds her own freedom now and of her own favorite form.
I really love that as well, too. I think of all people, Aelin especially understands what it means to not be free and to be the master of your own fate. And so I think it's very thoughtful and extra impactful coming from Aelin.
Yeah, I'm not going to read into it too far yet, but Adian being the one to suggest the land is open and available, my spotty senses are tingling about a future between those two. So be on the lookout.
I hadn't even thought about that, but that does seem a little like, oh, an Adian just happened to know of a random parcel of land overrun by ghost leopards that nobody wants and that perhaps you would be perfect for, Why not? Like, oh, okay.
I did get a little bit of silver in my eyes when Aelin tells her there is no one else I'd want guarding my back. If my people cannot see the worth of a woman who sold herself into slavery for the sake of a child, who defended my court with no thought for her own life, then they are not my people, and they can burn in hell.
Okay, is it just me, or is this a little over the top? Saying they can burn in hell is a lot. Obviously, I do not support anyone treating Lysandra bad because of her past, but it's a little much for Aelin to be like, yep, the people of Terrasen who have been oppressed for the last 10 years just need to embrace you with open arms, and if they don't, they can burn in hell. She does shit like that a lot, and to be honest, for me, it flirts a little with, if you don't agree with me, then you can die, and that is not the kind of energy you want in a ruler. And I'm not saying Aelin's bad or anything, but she does this a lot where she's like, well, if you don't agree, you can just die. And you're like, oh, that's a really strong reaction.
Fair enough, yeah. Later on, Aelin and her court are eating dinner together when Dorian knocks on the door. They have the most informal relationship, but I love it because they are friends and, there's no need for like titles and fancy talk when you're besties. And I thought it was really funny when she tells Dorian, sit your ass down.
Man, that is the king of Otterland. I feel like every meal is like Friendsgiving for them.
We also learned that Dorian is making good on his promise for a better future because he has signed a decree freeing all the conquered kingdoms from Otterland's rule that very morning, thus officially fulfilling Aelin's promise to Nehemia as well. I got shivers with this full circle dinner when Aelin thinks 10 years later and they were all sitting together at a table again, no longer children, but rulers of their own territories. 10 years later, and here they were, friends despite the forces that had shattered and destroyed them. This was just a chef's kiss moment. It just warmed my heart, and that is all I have to say.
My thoughts exactly. No.
Moving on to chapter 87. Manon and the 13 get back to Morath, where it's made clear that both the Duke and Vermin Vernon survived.
Boo.
As a small world-building note, Manon spills 3 drops of blood in thanks to the three-faced goddess because most of the covens had been outside training when Kaltain blew up Morath.
Oh my gosh, I was so mad when I read that Vernon survived. I really thought we were going to be rid of him. And then to see that, I was like, motherfucker. Because I really thought he would be down in the chamber where they were going to take Elide to, oversee what was going on. And then I'm like, that freaking rat survived.
It's also noted that the Duke was having his men search day and night for Kaltain, and obviously the key that was in her, which Manon still refers to as a stone. We know he wanted Kaltain's Shadowfire, but was there anything else the Duke, or Erewhon now, I guess, was going to do with the key? I thought he'd be like way more pissed to have lost a word key and Kaltain's Shadowfire, but he mostly seems unfazed and is continuing his plans with the witch towers and the battles basically as if nothing had happened,
Well, at this point, I think he assumes he's going to find it in the rubble, so he's not that worried about it. Once he realizes it's actually gone, I think then he's going to lose his shit. Because
True.
the key is indestructible, right? So even despite Kaltain's absolute devastation, I don't think he thinks it can be destroyed. And so he's annoyed, but I don't think he knows that it's gone from his possession.
I know Manon is playing along for now and agreeing to study the battle plans and stuff, but I can definitely see her playing spy from here on out. At this point, she's just gathering the info and she's going to bide her time for a good opportunity to flip everything and take some action.
Absolutely. I think right now she was really just waiting to see how things go. But if push comes to shove and she has to make a choice, I think she'll make the right one.
I think so too. I also love that she digs her nails into Vernon and says, just because she is dead, Lord, do not think that I will forget what you tried to do to her. Aelin Galathynius is alive, and I hear she has a score to settle. Ooh. Later on, Manon and Astrid chat about the witch's next move and what it means to love. I loved how Astrid describes her love for the hunter and her witchling, so I'm going to read the quote. It says, it was like dying a little every day. It was like being alive, too. It was joy so complete, it was pain. It destroyed me and unmade me and forged me. I hated it because I knew I couldn't escape it and knew it would forever change me. And that witchling, I loved her too. I loved her in a way I cannot describe, other than to tell you that it was the most powerful thing I've ever felt. Greater than rage, than lust, than magic. Obviously, we have loved Astrid, and I think she is so wise, but we've also been witnessing Manon's transformation as she unravels what it's like to actually be a living being and learn that she and the witches are more than these immortal machines of obedience, discipline, and brutality that they've been taught to become. I also think Manon recognizes this feeling of love. She just didn't realize what it is until now. She loves her 13. She loves Abraxos. She's developing a friendship love for Elide, and I do think that there's a little bit of something brewing with her and Dorian for sure, and we'll talk more about that shortly.
Oh yeah, I thought it was very telling for her to even ask Astrid in the first place. The old Manon would never. And so I think that's very telling in its own way.
Moving on to chapter 88. The cadre is packed up and mostly ready to depart home to Terrasen. But Aelin has a couple loose ends to check in on. First, she tries to get down to Elena's tomb, but it's blocked by rubble, and she hoped Mort had survived. I definitely think he did. I think the path is blocked, but Elena's tomb and Mort are magical, and I can't imagine they wouldn't be warded against destruction in some way. She heads back up to her room where Dorian and Chaol await. I thought it was funny how after she tells them she tried to check the tomb for old times' sake, she thinks, and maybe bite Elena's head off after she got answers to all her questions, but the ancient queen was nowhere to be found. If Elena existed in the modern world, she'd be like the biggest offender of posting and ghosting. She'd be the people who post like super dramatic or controversial things and then just like disappear with no response for a month while everybody like freaks out over what was said.
Oh my god, Aelin is totally matching my energy here. This is exactly how I feel. Poor Lorraine has had to listen to me rage about Elena and how annoyed I am with her for like weeks and weeks. She just fucking shows up and is like, do what needs to be done, and then fucking disappears. No, hey, by the way, we never actually slayed Erewhon. We just put him in a tomb. Or, by the way, the Duke is actually Erewhon. Thought that might be helpful, Instead, she's like, you will rattle the stars. Bitch, I don't need to rattle the stars. I need you to tell me what the fuck I'm up against, okay? Oh my god, this shit, it keeps me hot. It keeps me angry. I can't sleep at night when I think about it, and it just fucking drives me up a wall.
They go on to discuss logistics about the impending war with the Duke/Erewhon now, and she appoints Chaol as her official ambassador for Terrasen so he could work on forming allies in the southern continent. Chaol is just moving on up in the world. He's hand to the king, and now he's ambassador to Terrasen.
Yeah, baby. So these two things combined with Chaol needing to go to the Tory Chessmate to get healed, and then now needing to form an alliance with the southern continent, I think is really what's setting us up for Tower of Dawn.
Chaol then returns the Eye of Elena to Aelin, while Dorian asks he was wearing that for months, yet it never reacted, even in peril. Why now? And this has been a question we have been very curious about. In reality, that eye was basically useless for like the entirety of this series until now. And then, to be honest, Aelin's explanation is still insufficient, but at least is something. She says, Elena once told me that courage of the heart was rare and to let it guide me. When Chaol chose to, she couldn't form the words, I think that courage saved him, made the amulet come alive for him. So I guess this is just like the magical way of ensuring only worthy people get its protection. Like, if you're a coward, you gone. No protection for you.
Yes, I too found this a little unsatisfactory, especially when you think about Chaol is not a fucking coward. For months, he's been fighting Val guards, saving innocent civilians. Chaol ain't a little bitch. So all of a sudden, now he's finally courageous. I don't know. Just ignore it for the sake of the plot.
Maybe it's like now he was actually in true danger. And so then it was
true.
like, oh, okay, you can't get out of this one. I'm going to come in and give you some divine intervention here. The next morning, Aelin and Lysandra attempt to sleep in, but are ultimately forced out of bed when Aedion dumps a bucket of water on them. Rude.
I love this moment so much. It was so silly and lighthearted, and I feel like this is just a tiny glimpse of what life could be like for them once they, rid the world of all evil, including the darkest and most powerful being to ever walk the planet. But after that, things will definitely be like this all the time.
Before departing north, it was especially touching that Chaol asks to see Aelin's magic. And she shows him ribbons and plumes and flowers of red and gold fire. And then Chaol says, it's lovely.
Aww.
This is a huge moment for Chaol's character because prior to this, he's been really afraid of magic wielders and what the world would be like if magic was freed. Ultimately, seeing that magic can be used for good and that it's not magic and magic wielders as a whole that are bad has changed Chaol's perspective for the better. He embraces it and accepts it now that he has so many friends and allies that are magical beings, and I think he's changed his opinion on all that. Aelin also leaves Nazrin the solid gold arrow of Deanna that she had been gifted on Yulmus back in Calm, and then Chaol gives Damaris to Aedion.
I still think that Damaris will come into play in some way as our story progresses. The Eye of Elena turned out to be way more important than we thought it would be. And I think the same is going to be true for Damaris. I don't think its full purpose has been revealed yet.
Her last exchange is with Dorian, and they share some touching words. Aelin promises, there are things that won't change. I will always be your friend. And Dorian assures her that she will be missed.
Oh man, the tears were really rolling for me in this scene. I am really sad that they get no time together now that Dorian is freed from the Valg. Even just a couple of weeks, but is not meant to be.
With the goodbyes now over, the cadre departs passing through Rifthold, and by the Royal Theatre, Aelin hears music, beautiful, exquisite music playing within. That night, Dorian wakes up randomly and continues to reflect on his nightmares and the fragments of memories he had from when he was collared.
I wondered if what woke him up was a little tongue on a thread from the loom of the three-faced goddess, pulling him towards Manon.
Ooh, I love that. I'm going to say yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
It's canon.
It's clear Dorian is still plagued with guilt and fear, but he heads to the window where he sees a massive shadow and shimmering white hair of the rider perched on the glass wall outside. And I got so excited because Manon is checking in on Dorian. After her conversation with Astrid about love, it feels definitive that there's going to be something between Dorian and Manon at this point, especially because one of the few things that he can remember is Manon's name.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I think you're right. in relation to this scene, this is something Lorraine and I talked about off the pod, but I still cannot get over the fact that Manon left poor Elide, crippled, illiterate Elide, okay, in the forest alone because she had to get back. But then, like, 2 days later, she flies all the way to Rifthold. She couldn't fucking drop her off so she could hook up with Aelin immediately. She knew Aelin was in Rifthold. She told her that. And so
True.
when I read this, obviously I like the emotional aspect, but then, like, from a logistical perspective, I'm like, you abandoned Elide in the forest with basically no supplies and no training, but then you came right back for Dorian. Kind of fucked up.
True. Yeah, that's so true. We get Manon's perspective as she flies away from the glass castle, and though she didn't know exactly why she went to check in on him, she could definitely tell his greeting was a signal to say, I remember you. I loved how this chapter ends when it says, changing winds, a changing world, perhaps a changing 13 too, and herself. She didn't know what to make of it, but Manon hoped they'd all survive it. She hoped. Now, with that being said, it is a little bit ominous. Like, when immortal beings start worrying about staying alive and surviving, there's probably some shit that's gonna go down.
Fair
It's a little
enough.
worrisome, but
Yeah. I know I said this in my overarching thoughts, but SJM, man, she knows how to write all these little moments that are just so powerful and emotional. And this little scene is no exception. I could just see it and I could feel it,
yeah. And this now brings us to our final chapter, chapter 89. It's pretty crazy that Aelin is just casually traveling around with a word key just stuffed in her saddlebag like it's a snack or something. I just can't believe that there's no magical box or something that they could find or use to protect it at least a little bit. I don't know.
I can't breathe, Lorraine. This is so funny. It's so true, though, right? It's just like
I
in her
know.
pocket. Imagine having like a detonator for a nuclear bomb in your pocket. That's the equivalent.
Yeah.
Just loose in the pocket. No protective, nothing. Just a little oopsie, and you're like, oh, there goes.
Like, no safety whatsoever. It's just
raw.
You accidentally, drop that, and it, I don't know. It's wild. I did find it interesting that no one else besides Rowan seems to notice its presence, which she thinks is because of her magic masking it. She also comments that perhaps Lorcan was on his way to hunt down the second and third word keys, perhaps where Parrington Erewhon had held them all along if the king hadn't been lying. So again, this just seems to be confusing about whether or not the king actually had 2 keys in his possession. She thinks perhaps, and if the king had been lying, which isn't definitive language. I'm definitely starting to get a little bit annoyed about this, but the only thing we know for sure now is that Elide has one, and Aelin has one, and Erewhon possibly has one. So,
yep.
I guess
we know for sure where 2 are. The third one, same thing, back and forth. I think Erewhon has it, but unclear now.
I'm also kind of inclined to think that Lorcan knows about Erewhon, since he's likely going to head to Morath, or like that's what Aelin thinks. Maeve was around during the first Valg Wars, and Lorcan has been alive for several centuries and works for Maeve, which leads me to believe that he has to know Erewhon is back. He had to have heard through the grapevine what the king told Aelin and Dorian and Rifthold, or at least like some snippet of conversation related to that. I feel like he knows. We also get a small timeline update. It's been 3 weeks now since they started the journey back to Terrasen. And adding to our little speculation about Aelin and Lysandra, Aelin notes that Lysandra would spend time in different forms and sometimes spend days in her ghost leopard form, pouncing on Aelin whenever he least expected it.
If that isn't flirting, then I don't know what is. Speaking of flirting, I liked the description of all the little moments Aelin and Rowan stole. And once again, Aelin was matching my energy when she thought one night, just one goddamn night with him was all she wanted. And same girl, I just want you 2 to have at least one night and also to tell us about it. So,
oh my gosh, it's about time. I'm tired of waiting. On this day, it's finally happening. And Aelin announces, welcome home, Aelin, as they behold a land of towering mountains, the staghorns spread before them, with valleys and rivers and hills, a land of untamed wild beauty. Terrasen! And notably, it smells of pine and snow, which she had never realized until now was the same smell that Rowan has. Rowan is home. too. And I liked when he
Aw.
says, I feel as if I've been looking for this place my entire life. And now we all cry. Aelin whispers the song of thanks for Mala Firebringer, and at long last, Aelin Ashriver Galathinius was home. I'm just so happy and excited.
You know, I still think that Calm had the best ending sentence of any of the books so far, but damn if this is not a close second.
They're home.
They're home.
And now that ends our analysis. So now we just have our favorite moments to share.
All right. One of my first favorite moments is I loved that the moment Manon realized something was off with Elide, she began raising literal hell to get her. I never really doubted Manon, but I didn't expect her to fight so fiercely for Elide because she's really only sort of kind of a Blackbeak witch, and Manon hasn't known her for that long. But I just loved that whole chapter where she was like, oh, abso-fucking-lutely not. No, you didn't.
Right,
and she
right.
tore it up.
Yes, I totally agree. I liked that as part of her thought process for when she's rescuing Elide. She thinks, it did not seem like a weakness to fight for those who could not defend themselves.
Manon's growth.
Oh.
I also fucking love when Manon finally saves Elide and she goes, you're already dead, men. And I was like, ooh, like a shivery anticipation.
They gone. Yeah, they didn't stand a chance. I also liked when it says, I was always looking toward the horizon, always wondering what waited across the next ocean, over the next mountain. I think that whole time, all those centuries, I was just looking for you. That was Rowan's thought. So cute.
I loved when Dorian and Aelin are having their heart-to-heart, and he says, what do I do? And she says, you light up the darkness. And I was like, oh, I like that.
That was very cute. And then I also had a shared one for both of us. And it was when Chaol and Dorian are speaking. And it says, I'm not leaving you, not again. You never left me, Chaol.
Oh my gosh. Guys, that one really got me teared up, really got me fucked up. Okay. I loved when they were all having their big dinner together at the end. And Aelin thinks 10 years later, and they were all sitting together at a table again, no longer children, but rulers of their own territories. 10 years later, and here they were, friends despite the forces that had shattered and destroyed them. That's just such like a nice full circle moment. And you're just like, oh my gosh, here we are.
I love that too. There's so many good quotes about it. This one's a funny one. And it was when Aelin gives the ring and the land to Lysandra. And then Lysandra's like, proposing to me? How unexpected.
I love Lysandra.
And then my next favorite one was between Dorian and Aelin. And it's after they had the dinner. And Aelin says, to a new world, the Queen of Terrasen said, the King of Otterlin lifted his glass to freedom.
Oh, it's so weird when you read King of Otterlin because I'm so not used to that being Dorian. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Dorian. One of my all-time top favorite quotes, probably from the whole book, is when we get Manon's perspective, and at the end it says, she hoped. And I was finally, just like, oh, my heart.
Hope to go home. Hope for a better world. We love it. My second to last one was when Astrid says to Manon, things are changing. Good. We're immortals. Things should change, and often, or they'll get boring.
Aww.
And then this is our final one, and it says,
and at long last, Aelin Ashriver Galathinius was home. And if that didn't just fucking take me out, man.
The best line. Such a great way to just wrap up everything.
No.
And yeah, that now concludes our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we're so glad that you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today. So stay nerdy.
Live a little.
And we can't wait to read Onyx Storm with you all. And definitely stay tuned for our final wrap-up episode for Queen of Shadows. Bye!
Bye! And stay tuned for some bloopers. Manon landed... Oh, whoops. Manon launched
it into a spring.
Yeah, what? Wow. What the fuck happened there?
And I was really proud of Manon for realizing that. Sorry.
For realizing that. That really was like a very out of left field sneeze.
Ugh. It came on out of nowhere. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
It's contagious. You infected me. No yawning.